Hello, this is Rocky Marciano. When I was heavyweight champion of the world, they called me the Brockton Blockbuster. You find out why.
Welcome to the Rocky Marciano Archives, a channel dedicated to the life and career of the immortal champion. In this edition, we look at Rocky's nascent months under the tutelage of Charley Goldman as the genius trainer begins work on sculpting a work of art out of the rock from Brockton. Again, this is taken from the Archive's own John Cameron's biography, Redemption, The Life of Rocky Marciano, Volume 1, 1923 through 1949, available on Amazon. If you are interested in picking up a copy for yourself, then please check the links in description. For now, though, listen to the piece titled Birth of a Fighter. We hope you get something out of this. The lodging house of Mrs. Rosa Brauna, a large matriarchal woman with Austro-Hungarian roots, was to be found on 92nd Street in the Central Park area of New York. Here, in this brownstone building, Al Weil had worked out a deal in which his fighters would get preferential treatment. Such was his feeling for this location that he would refer to the place rather grandly as the House of Destiny, a title he bestowed due in part to his former champion, Lou Ambers, who resided there in the late 1930s and remained unbeaten whilst lodged at the address, including winning the lightweight championship of the world. Indeed, from this auspicious beginning, every boxer who came under the portly shadow of Weil would, at one time or another, find themselves in Mrs. Brauna's care. She was, by all accounts, a good house mistress, darning the boys' socks, collecting their mail, being the mother they missed, even ensuring all her boys were in their rooms by 10 each evening, with Weil calling just to be sure. In fact, in the words of Goldman, who himself inhabited the front parlor with its expansive window, allowing him to keep an eye on his pupils as they came and went, the walls of his modest domain covered with fight charts and photos, including, prominent above the fireplace, one of himself in his youth and another of his greatest pupil, Al McCoy. She is just like a mother to them boys. She even presses their trunks for them so they will look nice before going into the ring. Mrs. Braun is a restraining influence on them kids, recalled Charley himself in a 1947 Sports Illustrated piece. She was not even averse at times to prepare for her favorite boys her own specialty chicken-rich meal if she felt they needed feeding up. Otherwise, the fighters would eat at a Greek lunchroom in nearby Columbus Avenue, paying for their food with a voucher allocated to them by the ever-frugal Weil, who had purchased the ticket for $5. It had a $5.50 value at the lunchroom. Every time you ate, the ticket got clipped, and the only way a hungry fighter could expect another would be if he were able to produce the last voucher punched out to its entirety. It was into this environment that the eager Rocco Marcagiano would find himself upon his frequent journeys back to New York over the ensuing weeks with the ever-loyal Ali Colombo in tow. Their bills were paid by Weil, but this was no mere charity, however. Weil paid the rent for all his fighters who were based at Mrs. Braun's, taking back what he felt was owed out of their earnings in the ring, even if it meant he had to first rack up a bill before reimbursing himself. Each morning in the big city, Rocky and Ali ran around Central Park Reservoir. Its pastoral setting reminded the boys of home, before heading to the CYO gym to work with Goldman in the hope that this diminutive magician would go to work and create a masterpiece out of this malleable, ever-willing piece of human clay. We had to start from scratch, mused Goldman, as he pointed out the most obvious and pivotal weaknesses in Marciano's style. His stance and stride were way too long, throwing him way off balance. He threw his punches way too long, telegraphing them. He punched with his arms. He didn't get his shoulders or body into his punches. He didn't even know how to hold his hands. He was wide open. He didn't punch hard with his left. He threw one punch at a time. Slowly, but surely, the sculptor set to work creating his fighter. I started him off on defensive boxing. When I'd seen Rocky with his hands in the air, taking those body smashes, I knew how stupid that was, but I didn't say so to Rocky. I used a little psychology and told him that referees didn't give no points for standing up under the other guy's punches. I then began work on the basics. I brought his right foot up about a dozen inches and tied his ankles together with a piece of string that gave him just 24 inches of leeway. Once he was in this tighter stance, which automatically gave him better balance and body control, I taught him how to put punches together. Combinations, you know. The jab with his chin tucked behind the left shoulder, the right in front of the face, and the left brought back to guard as the right is crossed, and a left again, to the body this time, as the right resumed blocking. Frankly, Rocky wasn't able to do it when he first tried. I wasn't too disappointed, though, because I had figured right from the first that it was going to be a tough haul. Rock didn't have the knack of picking things right up the way some fighters do. Things only become part of him after work and more work. But Rocky learned fast the first rule. When you make your move, think of what the other fellow will be doing next and what you should do after he has made that move. I had to teach Rocky more than I ordinarily did to a novice boxer. The jab, for example. I told you he jabbed with his palm up. That's how green he was. Well, I showed him the right way. Palm down, knuckle straight, the arm driven all the way from the shoulder. And I told him to turn his head to the right as he jabbed with his left. It's a little trick, but an important one, to add a few inches to the length of a jab. With Rocky's short reach, it was a vital one for him. But, confessed Goldman, I never showed him that Susie Q knockout punch of his. That was all natural. Anything I did, I always told Rocky to ignore it if he thought that it was interfering with the way he threw that right hand. That was his #1 asset, that and a steel chin and body. What I did do was show him how to use it to better advantage, digging his right into the belly and then doubling up by bringing it up to the face in an uppercut and dropping his own right under a jab and following it up with an overhander. One thing that bothered me right away, continued Goldman, was that he was punching only with his arm. I wanted to get the combined efforts of his knee, hip, and shoulder behind his punches. So first I had him snap the hip in exercises, right to left, left to right. Then I had him practice a shoulder snap too. When he had learned both real good, I had him combine the two at once. Finally, I got Rocky to put his knee into it too, like a shot putter. With a bent arm like I showed him and hip, shoulder, and knee action, he had a short, sharp punch, but with everything he had behind it, it was a killer. Whilst in the Big Apple, Rocky and Allie, when they were not training, would trawl the streets amazed at their change in fortune, two almost small-town boys in the most vibrant city in America. Once they spotted the featherweight champion Willie Pep, all attired in his finery, with a beautiful woman on his arm, so they, like starstruck children, followed him to see, they said, what life was like for a champion. Pep stopped to buy his girl a flower at a street vendor's and pinned it ever so daintily onto her dress before kissing her gently on the forehead, then venturing into Leone's, a famous Italian restaurant. Marciano and Colombo tried to follow them in, but were politely turned away for being improperly dressed. Years later, when Rocky was himself a champion, he would dine there frequently. Then it would make no difference how he dressed. That finances were tight for the pair is well attested, however this was especially true in New York. Once they plucked up the courage to ask Al Whale for a $15 loan, they were refused with the alleged, off-handed comment, "You haven't earned it yet, go and have some fights then come back to me for money." It is reported that Goldman subbed them the $15, thus allowing the boys to stay on for a few days longer. It was good that they did, for it allowed them to show a true heavyweight legend just what was coming to town in the almost unimposing guise of Rocco Marciano. One morning, the former heavyweight champion, Jack Dempsey, came into the CYO accompanied by a heavyweight he was toying with the idea of managing. Despite being retired for over 20 years, he still yearned for the glory days of his youth, even if it meant living it vicariously through someone else. Over the years since his official retirement in 1927, he had been openly searching for a prospect he could nurture and guide to the title, and in this fighter, he thought he had found him. The man's name was Joe Wider, not to be confused with the same Joe Weider who would become synonymous with bodybuilding in the 50s and beyond, yet this guy was also, by all accounts, big and powerful. The old champ wanted to test him out, so he was put in with Rocky. Charlie wanted to see just how his own pupil was responding to his teachings. "Kid," said Dempsey to an awed Marciano, "I want you to hit him on the chin as hard as you can. I need to know if he can take a punch." So Rocky did as he was asked. The result was that Weider could not take what this raw heavy could dish out, ending up in hospital with a broken cheekbone. After his discharge, Dempsey promptly dropped him and he fell into obscurity, like so many others who met Marciano on the way up. He was not the first man to succumb to the power of Marciano's fists, and he certainly would not be the last. In between his frequent trips to New York, Rocky would work assiduously at everything he had been shown whilst back in his hometown. He even took on the dreaded speed bag, which he hated because he felt he was clumsy at it. Footage of Rocky, even in his title years, would sometimes show him awkwardly popping this small leather bag, a look of intense concentration on his face. Yet Goldman insisted for it helped to keep the fighter's hands high. Rocky's training regime had now begun to take over his life. 6 mornings a week he ran, often as much as 20 miles. He truly felt that stamina in his legs would prove crucial. He also became a frequent visitor to the local YMCA, where he would enlist the support of Henry J. Willman, who was serving as physical director at the Y Center, having been incumbent there since 1918, first as a volunteer, later assistant to Ralph Fish, and then, in 1939, the physical director. Henry was a student of physical culture, a former veteran, standout athlete, and vastly respected coach of both track and field, as well as basketball. His experience and advice were to prove invaluable to Rocky, as he constantly craved to improve his fitness, and he was a willing pupil before the usually smartly dressed Willman's ever-present stopwatch. Rocky supplemented the routines of the Y director by continuing with his practice of wading shoulder-deep into the pool, throwing punches. When Rocky got into the pool, all the kids would get out because they knew he was training, remembered Marciano's childhood friend, Nicky Sylvester. He'd go all the way in up to his neck and start throwing punches, and the water around him would ripple. But at the other end of the pool, it was splashing over the sides, and the pool was 60, 70 feet long. That was his power. Here he would perpetually break the punching bags of his friend Bob Galante, who graciously continued to give him lifts to meet Barbara after his workout was completed, and where he displayed another of his sometime bizarre quirks. Remembered Galante. Every time he would take a shower, he would put his clothes on when he was soaking wet without even drying himself off. The seat of my car would be soaked when he got out. No one could believe he would do that. No one does that. Despite his almost obsessive regime, however, Rocky tried to meet Barbara as often as he could, either at her house or, several times a week, he would meet her in Dunnington Apothecaries, where he would indulge in a chocolate frap whilst awaiting her arrival. However, these moments were to become less and less as Marciano began to ascend the heavyweight ladder. "I have always been amazed by her," mused Rocky later in life. "She could have walked whenever she wanted, but she didn't. She stuck by me all the way." Barbara herself would admit, "At first, to be honest, I didn't want him to be a fighter. I thought he ought to be a policeman like my father. But I could see it was what he wanted. What type of a girl would I have been if I had have walked out on him then when he needed me most?" Her father, however, was pleased that his prospective son-in-law had chosen to be a fighter. "My father had always been interested in sports," remembered Barbara in 1956. He promoted wrestling and boxing matches on the side. Lester Cousins' support extended as far as arranging for Rocky to gain private access to a gym located in Southeaston, some 12 miles from Brockton, and owned by a friend of his, Ross Murray, proprietor of the Raynham Dog Track in nearby Taunton. Initially, Murray had erected the fully equipped gymnasium for his own friend and professional boxer, Johnny Shkur. Ironically, in the not-too-distant future, Marciano would face this very fighter in the ring. From then on, Russ would become one of Rocky's biggest supporters. We loved the solitude of this beautiful country estate, reflected Ali Colombo. Because of Russ, we had our own private training camp. It was a setup usually only enjoyed by champions and contenders. Financially, things would remain tight for the duo. Due to the injury to his hand, Rocky had finally been forced to quit his job with the Brockton Gas Company, however. Colombo, in a moment of extraordinary bravado, approached none other than Joseph Downey, the mayor of Brockton himself, with the story of his and his pals' plight. Said mayor, sympathetic to their predicament, secured for them both some laboring duties for the city highway department. It was easy work and well paid. For the pair, it would serve the purpose for which it was intended, something to tide them over until Rocky made it into the professional ranks and could support himself. It was a job they would sorely need. Thank you for listening. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the remarkable life of an extraordinary man. Until then, in the words of Rocky himself,
Just remember, keep your left hand high, chin down, and keep punching.
If you like this content, then hit the subscribe button. To really support this channel, consider joining for just over $1 a month and unlock ad-free members-only content. Every member will play a key part in revealing the real Rocky.
As soon as the bell rang, it was a completely different person going out there, and I couldn't explain it except I just enjoyed combat. I just enjoyed the sport that I had learned so well, and I had practiced so much that when the bell rang, I did a job. I could concentrate on the opponent. The fight itself was strictly to prove myself as a fighter. I had to prove that I was a better man.